There are a couple missing. Puede ser que la BIED esté en espera.
Done.
A quienes se van sumando, les pedimos que se renombren poniendo el número de su grupo adelante de su nombre, que nos va a facilitar el trabajo para después armar las salas por grupos. All right, almost everyone is here. I think we're missing just one person, right?
Okay,
I think so.
great.
They're missing
Yes.
Or two.
Andrés and Fede.
Two. Yes. Andres, Fede, Martín.
All right, so we're missing 3 people.
Yes.
Don ustedes.
2. Countdown.
So you're 23 in total?
We have a new member of the team. We're going to introduce her now, who's facilitating technically. So that's why we'll be 23, I guess, right?
Yes. Besides this, I see twice Cande Simon.
Yeah.
Because
You're
it's
right.
using 2 devices.
Yes, it's me because my computer don't have a camera,
Microphone.
so I need to use the iPad and the computer to work.
Okay.
I just wrote to Andres. I don't know, Vic, if you talk to Martin or I can do
I
it.
mean, as you wish. I can talk to both of them. if you
I
want.
already talked to Andres.
Okay, let me check with Martin then. Just a quick.
Fede, si te querés poner el nombre, renombrar con el número 1 adelante el nombre, genial.
Okay, so while the 2 missing join us, do you think we should go ahead and start with the introduction? Do you feel okay? Or should we wait?
We're fine either way. Do you have an introduction you wanted to make on your end?
Yeah, I have an answer from Martin saying that he's joining right now, so he'll be here in a few seconds. No, we just wanted to say thanks, basically. That's the only introduction that we want to do, to celebrate that the day has come.
You're very welcome. It's our pleasure. We're looking forward to working with you all in the next 2 days.
I think that's the feeling that we all have here. The big day has come. Finally, we worked hard for this. Some people in the team worked very hard for this to happen. Let's celebrate that what would this be? Instead of the D-Day, the TD Day, Transition Design Day.
Yeah, that's right. That would be better than Thanksgiving Day, Transition Design Day.
Thank you, everyone, to this, as we said before, this amazing group, and why not new team of amazing people from all walks of life in Córdoba who is dedicating. All of you guys, thank you very much for joining this project and dedicating your very valuable time to learn together with us what Terry and Gideon are here to share with us. So thank you very much. Special thanks also to Vero Perez, who volunteered to be helping us with the technical aspects of the workshops today and tomorrow. Thanks and welcome, Vero. And thank you very much to all of you guys for spending time in we don't know where this will lead us. What we're gonna learn now might, take us to amazing places. We're talking about when we started, when there were just a few of us in this call, that today is Thanksgiving in the US. And it's amazing what Terry said, that how important it is to see it from a different perspective. We were talking about how many of our celebrations, the things that we're celebrating now, we might need to revisit how we look at them, and think that has a lot to do with the transition that we're in. So I think that today we're here to learn an amazing tool for these times of transition. Tincho, I don't know if you want to add something.
No, I think you have said it all, and just say that I think I feel it like a beginning of something. So there's some auspicious sense floating in the air. So very happy, and thank you all, yes, to be here. And thank you, Terry and Gideon, for all this work and time.
Pleasure.
So let's go.
Okay. Well, I guess on our side, I want to say that we too are very, very thankful, and we're really honored that, you know, we're able to work with you for these 2 days and in the weeks leading up to this. And I think it's important to remember we're all learning together. You know, we always learn as much from the participants in these workshops as they learn from us. I think the spirit within which we do this work is very much that it's time that people all over the world start thinking more systemically about these problems in order to address all of the social and environmentally negative ramifications of the way people live on the planet. And so we continue to be amazed every time we work with a group like yours. It gives us hope. But we're all learning in this together. There's no one, I don't think, on the planet that knows how to solve a wicked problem. It's just we're among the first people that are actually devoting time and energy and trying to integrate this search into our lives in order to make the places we live better. So I think history hopefully will look back and say, wow, these people, everyone thought they were crazy at the time, but it was a beginning. It's a first step toward trying to create an international body of knowledge that can be passed on to other disciplines, other people, but especially people that are even, well, everyone's almost younger than me, but younger people that are younger than even you on the call. I mean, can we discover principles and ways of working that we can give to younger generations so that they're thinking that way from the beginning? And these workshops are an opportunity for all of us to enter into uncertainty and try to figure out what works and what doesn't work. So I think we all have to let go of this mindset of the expert. We all have expertise that we're bringing to this work, that we're bringing to the workshop, but we have to figure out together how it works. The other important thing to say is the tools and the approach that we're introducing to you in this workshop are to be used in co-design with the stakeholders who are affected by the problem, as you know. So it's really important to remember that even though we're working on a problem in the workshop, each team, it's always hypothetical, because you can't arrive at a usable idea or solution, because we are all working in a vacuum today and tomorrow without having enough of the people who the problem is affected with us. So I said to someone earlier, you know, if you learn to play golf or if you learn to do anything, you get your first lesson and they teach you to hold the golf club, they teach you how to swing, and it's really hard to even hit the ball at first. So you don't think after that first experience, or maybe the first 2 or 3 experiences, that you can go out and play golf. So we're all kind of learning to hold the club, hit the ball, and then hopefully you'll have a project in which you can really begin to go out there and use these tools with the stakeholders. So the spirit of the workshops has to be complete permission to get it wrong, to ask a lot of questions, to play with these new ideas. And sometimes with something like this, the ideas don't really take root until afterwards, until after you leave the workshop. So we're absolutely willing to try and support you in some way after. So that's the intro. So what I want to do right now is very quickly go through a review of what you do next, which is map a wicked problem. You're going to spend about 45 minutes mapping your wicked problem. Gideon and I will be leaving comments on your board, so look for those little talk bubbles. What color do you want to be?
Green.
Gideon will be green bubbles and I'll be red bubbles, so look for those. We're also going to be sending you messages on WhatsApp Like if we see a general thing everyone needs to know, we'll send you a message on WhatsApp. We'll also send you a message when you have about 5 minutes before we bring you back into this space. If you want us to visit you in your breakout room, send us a WhatsApp message and Veronica will shoot us in there. So like Star Trek, she's Scotty at the helm today. She's going to be beaming people up and down. So that's the way we'll interact with you. Right now, I'm going to screen share very quickly and review mapping a wicked problem. Does everybody see my screen? Give me a thumbs up if you do. Okay, great. So remember that we said wicked problems have all of these very, very difficult characteristics, and I think all of the problems that you're working with do. So you're going to be focusing on a single wicked problem, but we want you to think about the other problems other teams are working on as part of a bigger Córdoba problem cluster. So as you map your problem, be looking at the corner of your eye at what your other teams are doing to think about whether there are connections between your problem and others. And remember, it kind of looks like this. Your problem's in the middle. Your problem is homelessness in Pittsburgh. All of the other teams' problems are surrounding it in this cluster. And so you'll see the other problems in the corner of your template. Now, the thing to remember is you're going to be mapping your problem in these 5 categories. So the pink area, economic and business, is about how your problem is concerned with economics and business and money, and how that is either contributing to the problem or keeping it stuck. So with homelessness, it's things like this. You know, it's about people wanting to make money, and the need to make money keeps the problem from being solved. Politics, governance, and legal, it's how policy issues are or are not being passed to solve the problem. It's maybe political lobbyists. It's anything to do in these areas. The infrastructure is all of the systems. It's our physical structures. It's the rules about how we do things. It's our technology. It's scientific issues. It's everything like that. And it's kind of difficult in the beginning to try and think rigorously about how the problem is manifesting in each of these areas. You'll start to maybe put a post-it in one category and we'll give you a comment and say, actually, that belongs over there. So it takes practice to dissect and deconstruct a wicked problem. This is a really important area. The orange area is how we think and what we do. This is how humans are the root of most of the problems. Almost any post-it you put anywhere else on the map will have a corresponding post-it here, because the problem always begins with how we think and how we behave. This, people get confused about this. This is not about people. This is about other species and the environment. So this is where your problem is harming the environment or non-human species. If it's about what humans are doing, it goes in the orange section. So this is the template you're going to be working with. And on the example above the template, and look at this closely, we've walked you through the steps of how we created the example. So we put a post-it down in the green section, and then we asked, what is that post-it connected to, maybe in the economics section? So we put another post-it or 2 down, and then we said, how does that connect in other sections? So here we tried to find how it's connected in the social section to how we think and what we do. And then we asked, what are the political facets or issues that are connected to these other post-its? And then finally, in the infrastructure and technology, how is it connected to that first post-it we put down? And you can see we're drawing connections with these yellow lines, and we're labeling or talking about the connection there. So what you'll be tempted to do is this, and this is what not to do. We always see people brainstorming with Post-its. We've all been working with Post-its for so many years. We're used to, oh, quick idea, put it down on a Post-it, put it down on a Post-it, put it down. Do not try and populate or fill one area by itself. This is not what to do. But this is what we see people doing all the time. Oh, let's work in the blue area. Now let's put a bunch of Post-its down in the turquoise area. Now we'll fill out the economic area. Now the social area. This is a new way of working with Post-its. What we want you to do is put one Post-it down. It can be anywhere, right? You write a complete sentence about how the problem is manifesting or emerging there, and make it really clear. No single word Post-its, no partial sentences. And if you can write it in English, we'll be better able to help you. I'm so sorry that we can't speak Spanish. I'm taking lessons. So when you put a Post-it down in one area, immediately look around and say, what, where, or how does it connect in another area? And when you put that Post-it down, connect those two. So as you populate your map, and here's an important thing, you guys can work individually. You don't have to discuss every Post-it as a team. You can all be working, but just periodically look at what you've done, and if something is wrong, then discuss it. So your map will be taking shape and growing something like this. What we always do is we put down a Post-it and we try to work in all of the areas of the map as we go. So eventually you're going to have something like this. You're going to have organically grown the map with all of its connections, and those connections are the keys to understanding why the problem is stuck, but they're also the keys to understanding how to create ecologies of solutions in the last step tomorrow. So this is kind of what your board is going to look like. You may not have time, but what we also want you to think about is, are there areas of our problem that can connect to the other problems on the Moreau board, right? So I'm going to stop sharing and see, does anybody have questions they want to ask about that, concerns? Okay. Well, if it all seems okay, then we're going to ask Veronica to shoot you all into your Miro boards, and we'll probably wait about 5 or 10 minutes before we start putting comments down. You have about 45 minutes. We're going to bring you back into this group Zoom space at about 10 minutes after 3. But we will give you time checks, okay? Okay, Veronica, you can ping them up. Welcome back, everyone. Do we have everybody back, Veronica? Yeah?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You're
Well,
welcome.
how was that? Was it okay?
Yes. Did we approve? Did we pass the first test?
Yes, I think you're doing very well. The main thing to say is we don't normally think this way, do we?
No.
This is not how we think. And so what we're asking you to do is think and work systemically and holistically. And all of our societies in the West and many in the South, we just think in terms of silos, right? Or in terms of disciplines or categories. And what we're trying to do in this exercise is get us to make connections across many areas. And the reason we do this is if a wicked problem is like a ball of yarn that is all tangled up, in doing this, we're trying to pull strings apart in order to loosen the knot. And if we understand how the problem is connected in the infrastructure area and what the attitudes in the social area are that keep it stuck, and how policy and laws are changing over here because of this, then we understand that when we try to solve it, we have to work on all of these different areas with different kinds of solutions simultaneously. So when we deconstruct it and we then label the connections, this will give us clues tomorrow afternoon on how we can come up with solutions that will not solve for one issue over here, but if you create the right solution, it will ripple positively all over the system. That's what we're really trying to do, is create solutions that go everywhere at once. And we can only do that if we map this very complicated set of connections. Now, the other thing that we find it's difficult to condition ourselves to do because it feels negative is every post-it has to be about a problem. And I think we try to be positive and optimistic all the time. So this is about being really negative. It's like, this is a problem, and this is a problem, and this is a problem, and this is how it connects to the bigger problem. So for this step, you're up to your eyeballs in thinking about the problem. And so when you first begin to learn this, people will write a statement of fact. So you're just writing a description of what is, instead of saying why it's a problem and how this smaller problem is connected to the bigger problem. So you'll see descriptions that aren't descriptive enough. You probably saw our notes. Even though we understand what you mean, and you are understanding what you're doing, but we're also trying to teach you to write on the Post-its in a way that will be clear for strangers. So people could come new to your problem map, and simply by looking around, they're going to gain a systemic understanding of that problem simply by reading your notes. So we use Post-it notes so often in an informal way as preparation to doing a final presentation. What we're trying to get you to do is make the Post-its the final presentation. And if you write clearly, then as you're working with stakeholders doing this, because everyone can completely understand each other's Post-it notes, by the end of this process on a real project, everyone has gained a common understanding of the problem, because you're not looking at a Post-it someone else wrote and going, what did they mean by that? Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's a really common mistake. Everybody does this, but it's just after you practice for a few times, it just becomes what we say in English, second nature. You'll just do it without even thinking about it. But tomorrow, we're going to ask you to do the same thing in the positive. You'll be writing about a positive future, but we will want you to be completely descriptive and write in clear sentences. So someone from another team can come to your map or come to your vision and they know exactly what all the Post-its mean. But we also can tell that you're all understanding, it seems to us you're understanding how to deconstruct the problem. It just takes practice, if that makes sense. Yeah? So is everybody ready to think about moving on to mapping stakeholder relations? Yeah? So you're going to be working on the template that's directly below your problem map. And on this one, you're going to identify 3 or 4 groups. If you only want to work with 3 groups, that's okay. You're going to identify 3 groups that are affected by the problem or connected to the problem. And the interesting thing about these wicked problems is transition design says on an actual project, you would try to identify every stakeholder group affected by the problem. This would take a long time. And many of those groups will not be human. Today, you're not going to do that. You don't have time. But in every wicked problem, there are groups really badly affected by that problem. They're suffering from it. But there are also groups that either don't care or benefit from the problem not being solved. Do you see what I mean? So on your map, it would be a good idea to try and find groups that are very different. Maybe like with poverty, which group in poverty, and don't just say poor people, that's too big. Like which of the groups that are poor are really badly affected by the problem in Córdoba? But is there a group that doesn't want things to get better, either because it will cost them money or it, you know, because maybe people in a certain neighborhood have a lot of power with politicians, and so the politicians are not going to change laws very much because these powerful, wealthy people. Do you see what I mean? So when you pick your groups, we want you to think about that. I'm going to share my screen just quickly and remind you of the template. Can you see the screen? Great. So if your wicked problem is in the middle, there are all these groups around that are affected. Some are not human. And they all have these complicated relationships between each other. So we want you to start mapping opposition or areas in which they disagree or what they need is in opposition to each other with red lines. And we want you to map relations or hopes that are the same or complement each other with green lines. So remember this, where we looked at these 3 groups in Ojai about the water shortage. These people have very different needs and hopes and fears about the water shortage. So we want you to do this. We want you to pick the groups, and in the talk bubble, we want you to write in the first person, plural or singular. I mean, does anybody know how to, you know what I mean, right? I want to make sure there's not a translation problem there. Write as if you're talking about me or us, because when you do that, it puts you in touch with the emotion that each group has about the problem. This problem is emotional and scary and upsetting for each group. So we want you to write about it as if they're speaking. But we also want you to look for where are the areas in which they agree, but you don't make the connections until the end. So here, pick either, you know, 3 or 4 groups and put the group name in the black boxes, and first fill in the pink bubbles. This is everything they're afraid of or concerned about relative to the problem. And then fill out the green boxes. That's what their hopes and desires are about the problem. So you might want to divide the group up. You know, one person might want to fill it in for one group and somebody else for another group. But then you're going to go in and look for the ideas, the opinions, the fears between groups that keep the problem stuck because they're opposite. Connect those with the red lines and discuss it. Now, here's the worst kind of problem. When a big fear for one group is a big hope or desire for another group. That is the most difficult kind of relationship to begin to resolve in the system. Doing this on a real project, you would spend weeks on this, and you would do it talking to the stakeholders themselves. So today, you're just speculating about this, yeah? So with COVID-19, we had the Trump administration as a group. We had factory workers in a meat packing plant as another group. Oops. And we had restaurant owners as another group. And so you can see we're writing as if that person was speaking. You have an example of this right above your empty template. So be sure to look at that to get an idea. So on this one, don't make the connections until you filled out the pink and green, the pink and the green talk bubbles. Okay? Questions about this? No? Okay, so
yes, I have a question.
Okay.
When you work in a real case, do you begin with this mapping, with the people mapping, asking them what are the problems, or you begin just thinking what are the problems, and then you verify that hypothesis with people?
That's a really good question, Miguel, and I think you could do it either way. And every city, every situation is going to be unique in that way. We begin by first trying to list as many different groups as we can. And you can do that with research among your team. But then you're going to have to use a variety of techniques. Like sometimes you can hold workshops with the stakeholders. And when you have the different stakeholder groups, then you would have each group map their own fears and their own hopes. And then in the workshop, you can get them mapping the connections of red and green between each other. But we're also going to have to develop field research techniques or maybe online surveys that will enable each group to say what their hopes and desires are. So we're going to have to use a wide variety of research techniques to get all of this from the stakeholder groups. But when you talk to each group, you're also going to have to ask them, what other groups do you think are affected? It's even more complicated because most of the time, people will be members of more than one stakeholder group, right? So if you're looking at waste management, you might be talking to people who work for the waste management company, but they're also a member of a certain neighborhood whose garbage has to be picked up. So that's why it will take a long time. And one of the things our PhD students are working on with us are what are the new research tools we need to develop to reach all of these stakeholders this way. This exercise is meant to get you thinking about that so you too can help create new tools for getting at this information. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes, okay.
Great. I'm going to remind you guys again, be sure to write in really clear sentences that have enough information on them so that when Gideon and I understand what you mean. Okay? So as you can imagine, it will take a while to go out there and get all of the stakeholder attitudes. Workshops are great because they begin to build advocacy or champions for the approach. People come to a workshop, they have this experience, and then they're like, oh my gosh, maybe I don't hate you after all because we actually have some common ground. And then that creates a positive buzz, if you see what we mean. Now, the next piece, this is a really difficult step. It's a really important step, and you don't necessarily have to do it with the stakeholders, but it does take time, and it's going back in history, probably many decades, to try and understand when the problem began. So the first thing you're all going to have to do is draw a timeline on the template and decide where to begin. And that's probably going to be at least 50 years ago, but in Córdoba, who knows? Like with poverty, when did poverty begin? Probably a really long time ago. That top level is about our big collective beliefs, attitudes, movements, things like globalization or the big overconsumption society, things like this. The middle level is where all of our societal infrastructure lives. So it's the legal systems, it's the transportation systems, it's the economic systems, it's what's stuck. Below are the new ideas or solutions or innovations that are always bubbling up through history, and they're trying to get up to that middle level to become part of the status quo. Most of them don't make it. In this workshop, you don't have enough time to fill this out well, but just try to get a few Post-its at each level and begin to get a feeling for what the events, the attitudes, the historical movements were that helped create your wicked problem. So let me just quickly screen share. And you'll remember in the lecture we gave, we showed you a really complex map that we did for COVID-19. Remember this? It's up on our academia.edu page. So you see here at the top, big things like wars, the Industrial Revolution in the United States, this big evangelical Christian thing, has had a huge impact on many wicked problems in our country. Slavery in my country has just created so many problems. Those big things go at the top. But, you know, with COVID-19, our healthcare system discoveries about the virus go at the bottom, but eventually they become part of the middle and the status quo. So here is your template. And on the top, above that top blue layer, that's where you're going to have to put your timeline. So again, you have an example right above for COVID-19. What we sometimes do to get started is go to the problem map and say, okay, what are some of the issues we identified? When did they begin back in history? And again, transition design is all about making connections between things. We are very good at creating things or many ideas. We are not very good at connecting the dots, as they say. We are not very good at recognizing patterns. And therefore, in transition design, these maps that we create, the connections between things are as important as the issues you're writing about, because these are the threads, the push-pull. If we don't see the thread and we don't pull on it to rearrange the system, we're not going to be able to solve the problem. So as you're putting Post-its, remember, write incomplete sentences. This isn't about problems. This one you can just write about things like deforestation happens or trade routes connect the USA and Europe. But you do want to connect things up and down systems levels. So here with COVID-19, you see that at the niche level, small farmers in China were forced off their land when China began industrial farming. And that was at the middle regime level. So these big factory farms pushed little farmers out and they had no way to make a living. So what did they do? They moved to bad land that was near the forest. And because the land wasn't good, they could not farm. So they began trapping wild animals. And then later they began raising them so that they could be sold in the wet markets in town so that people could eat them, because they believe that the vitality from a wild animal goes into you when you eat it, or the wild animals were used for Chinese medicine. So what this did was it brought wild creatures deep from the forest into contact with humans. And so that is tied with the discovery of the first coronavirus, again at that bottom level, in the mid-1960s. So these are, what this really represents is a historical understanding, a historical understanding of the problem. Here at the top level, you see that in COVID-19, the big collective fact that global travel is now a normal thing and it's everywhere, that helps spread the virus. Now, global travel is connected to many other wicked problems, but it's also connected to the spread of COVID-19. We also see in my country an incredibly polarized political landscape. You probably even read about that in Argentina, I'm imagining, you know, how crazy Trump is on one side and how, okay, now we have Biden, but neither side will agree. That has affected the response to COVID-19. So remember, you put these big events at the top. They're not the only, like your problem is not the only thing it's connected to, but it's probably partly connected to it. For instance, poverty in many places around the world is absolutely connected to big movements like globalization, industrialization, things like this. What else? So anyway, when you're working on an actual project, this map is going to look more like this. This is the historical evolution of a lack of access to healthy food in Pittsburgh. So imagine when you and your team do deep research to try and understand your problem as it evolved in Córdoba over many decades, you are going to come to such a deeper understanding of that problem that when you finally begin to develop solutions, this will be in your body and it will inform the solutions that you make in a different way. For instance, when we did the COVID-19 map, one of the things we discovered was that the American Medical Association, almost from its beginning in the early 1900s, made a profit deal with the big pharmaceutical companies. So that meant that medical doctors weren't interested in alternative or natural remedies because they needed to be making money for the pharmaceutical companies because the pharmaceutical companies made money for them, right? So we don't have socialized medicine in the United States. So if people lost their job because of COVID-19, they lost their health care. They lost their health insurance. And the doctors don't want that to change because of profit. So something like that we would never have discovered if we didn't do this kind of research. Now, this map took probably 3 weeks to make. On an actual project, you could have part of your team just working on this, while another part of your team was out there talking to stakeholders. Yeah. So I think that's, yeah. So I'm gonna stop screen sharing. So hopefully you all have had a bit of time in the last few weeks to do research, and hopefully you have some idea of the history of your problem in your head. I think the first thing to do is discuss when to begin your timeline and then start putting Post-its down. So if you put a Post-it in the regime, ask, okay, what does that connect to at a higher level? Or are there things going on down at that lower level that are maybe ideas to fix poverty, but they haven't had the opportunity to be accepted? Like in this country, an idea at the bottom level has been universal basic income. And Americans have always been very opposed to that. Now with COVID-19, we were all having to depend on the lowest paid workers in our society. in order to keep going. And when those people get sick or lose their job, our economy is going to crash. So now all of a sudden, this idea that's been at the bottom level is starting to come up to the regime level because of this big event at the landscape level that just happened. Play with it today. This is the piece that takes the most experience and practice to learn. So just do your best and watch for our comments. Do you have any questions right now? It's all okay? Hopefully you're not too frustrated. Well, it seems like you all just jumped right into that. There's some really exciting things beginning to happen. So how was that for you?
It was good.
Yeah? I mean,
Yep.
You can see how if you had more time, you would just create this incredibly rich tapestry. It's such a deeper understanding of your problem. And I know for many years, I ran a pretty large design company called Meta Design. We had offices in San Francisco and Berlin and London and Zurich. And we worked on pretty big projects of all kinds, but we never did research like this. And I think if we had, our client presentations would have been so much stronger and so much more convincing, because we would have understood the problem on such a deep level that we could have fielded any questions. And you know how often when you make client presentations or you're presenting anything, you get a question that comes at you out of, as we say here, left field, and you'll be like, oh, I hadn't thought of that, I don't know. But I think this research just gives you like points.
It's a blink of an eye.
Isn't it fact in every, even though we all know what these problems are, every culture, we know what poverty looks like, we know what racism looks like, we know what slums are like, but these problems manifest, they are place-based and culture-based. And until you get down to that nuance, I don't think you can solve them in an appropriate way.
That's why we said that we hear in historical revisionism, we say that United States is not a melting pot; it's a fruit salad. So you have all the fruits in the bowl, but they haven't mixed. Oranges are still oranges, bananas are still bananas, but they haven't mixed. It's a fruit salad, not a bowl.
Well, that is absolutely true. And the very first fruit in the country, when people of my color arrived, we just killed them all. So there's
that we were talking about.
Yeah, the original fruit's just gone. And
Yep. All right, sorry for the detour. Just let's go back because we have 10 minutes left. Sorry for the detour, but it's just passion.
I think that these things are so important, and I think it's certainly given us a passion for history, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, when we run seminars, we were very happy to have historians. We didn't quite realize at the beginning how important history would be, and historians' involvement in understanding these problems would be, but it's always a great help.
Yeah. And we're living in such an incredible time in history too, because all this information is accessible to us. And even 30 years ago, we couldn't have done this. And now look how much you all did just in 30 minutes. If you had a month to work on this, and in your research, you started talking to experts like in education or waste management or historians or anthropologists, you could create an understanding of the evolution of your problem that would put you in demand in every government department practically that is connected to that. All it takes is time, really. So I think our big question as folks trying to share these ideas with you, can you see, even with this little introduction, the ways in which you might be able to use part or some of these tools in doing what you do with the communities there?
Yes, indeed.
Good. I mean, our biggest worry is always that the time is so short. You, of course, can't really, as we say, crack the problem. But did you have enough time to feel like you understand why you would do it and what the objective was? Because what we're looking for is, if it's not clear, we need to change the way we're teaching it.
Wondering, how do you, like, when you do this for real, when do you say, okay, this is like enough, we can't continue, it's just about matter of time? Or is there a point that you reach and you go like, okay, good enough?
Well, that is an excellent question, Caro, and I'm so glad you asked it. Ideally, this would become an ongoing process, more like software design. You know how when we get the latest operating system or you get the latest version of InDesign, you don't get that and say, oh, good, we're done. They've solved all of these problems. Thank God. This is the last time I'm going to have to upgrade to Big Sur. I think that's the latest one out on the Mac. What we need to think of is this like software. So we go through a process of framing a problem and mapping it. We understand its historical evolution, and then we're visioning and backcasting and solutioning. All of those, maybe not the history, but all the others should be a cycle that we repeat. Because when we get ready, after we've understood the problem, we've developed the vision, and then tomorrow afternoon, you're going to develop entire ecologies of solutions. I use the metaphor as acupuncture. How many of you have had acupuncture? Anybody? Yeah. So when you go to the acupuncturist, he looks at your system and it's out of balance. It has a wicked problem. The system is out. He looks at it. He pokes you, he looks in your eye, takes your pulse, and then he might put 2 or 3 needles in you, and then he says, go away and come back in 2 weeks. You have to come back because he has to see how your system has responded to the needles. Think of the needles as solutions. So no 2 systems are going to respond the same. So you will put your ecology of interventions or solutions in there, and then you have to see how that system, that neighborhood is going to respond. And then you intervene again. But periodically, you have to revision. Visioning, the co-creation of long-term visions needs to be an exercise that we're just in all the time. So does solutioning. So does looking again at the problem and adjusting our understanding of the problem as it responds to the perturbations. Now, this is not the way we normally think about, as experts, solving a problem. We study it, we come up with solutions, we're done, we're out of here. So one of the things that transition design says is for people like us, if we're going to come to a community, come to a system to help resolve a problem, we also need to grow the capacity of actors who are already in the system so that they're the people that stay with it over the decades that will be necessary to solve the problem. So you have actors within the system who will make sure the cycle is repeated time and again. Periodically, you're always visioning. Periodically, you are remapping the problem. Periodically, you are coming in and intervening again. And this is going to be a challenge because time is money. So who pays for this? Who's working on it? But it's also like a relay race. You know how when we were children and we took track, you'd run the relay race and you had the baton for a little while and then you handed the baton off to the next runner. Well, in a way, for those of us working with communities, but not in that community, we have the baton for a little while. And we have to figure out how to design to hand it off so that people like us are holding the system. You know, maybe you're helping hold several neighborhoods in Córdoba during a period where they're trying to deal with a problem, but who are you going to hand it off to? How are you going to grow actors within these neighborhoods who you can work with and who will maintain continuity over time? So this is where our role changes from, especially designers like me. We came in as the experts. Okay, I've looked at your problem and here's what you have to do. And then you give them a solution and I'm gone. Well, no, we have to show up as being in service to the system. We have to bring resources. We have to help them design for themselves. And then we have to bring resources to grow champions and leaders within that system who can carry on when we're gone. And that's a very different kind of posture. There's a really important book. This is a great book. Has anybody ever seen this book? This is sort of a legendary man named Robert Greenleaf, who was writing about leadership, I think back in the 1940s. And he developed a concept for leadership that was called servant leadership. So to lead, you have to be in a mindset of service to. And he used Hermann Hesse's book, The Journey to the East. I don't know if anybody's read that, but in this fiction, it's fiction. In this story, these English people they're trekking into the Himalayas, and they have a Sherpa who's carrying all of their luggage and their food and everything. And at the end of the story, you realize that the Sherpa was the great leader, and he was cooking for them, he was carrying their luggage, he was doing everything. But the twist of the story is that all along, these, you know, privileged Englishmen thought that he was the lowly Sherpa, but he was actually the leader. So doing this work also involves that big piece, planning for your own departure. Any other questions or comments? No?
I have a comment. This last activity felt super hard to do right before we started doing it. The blank page was a super great challenge that we were like reflecting on. Wait, we don't know where to start. So it was, I think it's good to share that moment.
Did it get easier once you started putting Post-its down?
Yes.
Yeah. Systems are very scary. They're very scary. And I think the reason most of our problem-solving approaches, we draw the tightest frame around a problem as possible. So the smaller the context, the quicker you can get it done and the more profitable you can get it done. And you can declare it's really solved, which is just a mirage. It's not solved. You just tell yourself it's solved. So when you draw these big frames around the problem and you really look at just how tangled up that ball of yarn is, and you start pulling on the threads, and you're just like, oh my God, you just want to curl up in a fetal position and crawl under your bed. It's too much. But I really believe that when you bring people like this group together and we all just start teasing it out, it can be done. It's just, we have to have such patience and fortitude because it will take long periods of time. So either we say, oh, I might only work on 2 or 3 projects in my whole life, or you have to plan to hand the baton off. Like every project I get involved in at my age, I know I got to hand the baton off. I'm not going to see them solved. So it's so much about mindset and posture also.
I have a small question, and I think it's related to what Anand comment, and it is if you have like one set of questions that maybe guide the groups in the different parts of the process. So that's the question.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand.
If there are like, if you have some specific set of questions that helps the different groups to go by each part of the process, no? Like this set of questions would help you to start working on the first board of the middle from today, for example. And
yeah,
this will, I don't know.
We've never formulated it as a series of questions. We have put little prompts on the templates. Like at the end of the one you were just working on, there were some bubbles to read. We're also right now in the process of trying to make videos that people can watch that talk about each of these steps. And we're just now finishing them up. So I think in the future that may help. Before, we used to have a lot of instructions on the templates and we found people didn't read it. So it would be good if you know, any ideas like this that you have, we'd be happy to hear. And in fact, Gideon is working on a feedback form that we hope to give you tomorrow at the end of the workshop. If you would be willing to fill it out, it would really help us make things better. So you could do us a favor and maybe suggest that in the feedback form. Yeah, great. Thank you all. Melissa or Martine, Victor, any last comments for the group or questions for us?
I was sitting with this sense that getting into a wicked problem is something that is infinite. We can stay for eternity, opening up new templates and more data, and we'll be always reaching to new places and connections and relationships. And I was sitting with this reversal of this sense of feeling overwhelmed. That is that in the end, it's all an expression of the same phenomena happening that we are observing, and we're just observing the same thing from different aspects. And on the way, we get a richer picture of, and a more accurate picture of what we are looking at. And so, and that feels, I mean, I was sitting with this sense of observing our last exercise and seeing how something that happened in a very niche level finally was a response to something that was happening in the landscape level, and that and I was able to see that whole movement, because it was a real thing for our agriculture technologies, how we shifted from one way to do things to another way, and it was like a response, and how it affected the problem. So it was a very small insight in a very big picture that we were looking at. So I'm sitting with that feeling of that somehow the relationships, they are there. They are on. We have to just look at them differently in order to see them, because they are all available. I'm not an expert. I don't live in Córdoba, and I'm not an expert, but this touched me deeply, because it's something that's not only in Córdoba happening, it's something happening in the whole Argentina area. So suddenly it's strong. So I'm sitting with that. I'm very grateful of having this experience. And we were just having like a small, in our chat, I asked, how are you feeling, to Victor and Meli and Flor? And we all agreed how we felt in each one of the groups, the the enthusiasm and how people were really open to work during this 3-hour time, and I think that's an expression of commitment and how everyone were really inside of this first day of our workshop together.
That's that's such a nice reflection. Thank you. And I can say from experience that, you know, we're not experts either, but we've done this exercise many times since March. And it's not about the thing that we're creating. It's about the new ways of thinking and the conversations we're having with other people. And it's almost like what you make is a byproduct of that. And we constantly, we're always reflecting on how much better we've gotten at it without knowing it, because you'll have a conversation with something about something with somebody else and you'll say, oh yeah, but that connects to that, connects to that. And then this would, and they'll go, what? And people will be amazed that we're making these connections. It's like, how do you know that? And it just becomes a different way of thinking. And it's not that you're special or you know more. That's the really important thing to hang on to, is I'm not smarter than anybody else. We've just been practicing using muscles we don't usually use. So that is hopeful for me as well, and a compliment, I think, to what you just said, Martin.
I can't help but dream of thousands of people in Córdoba having these conversations in different places. So based on your experience, guys, what does it take to, like, time being so important in order to go through the process, and with all of us being so busy and, with all the distractions, what has, on your experience, worked in order to make the processes like endure or last? Is there any insight that you've had?
Well, it's still too soon, Victor. We probably won't be able to answer that question for many years. We have only had a tiny, like you said, somebody said a blink of an eye. We have seen, though, when you can bring stakeholder groups together in a workshop, and they are able to have even 1 or 2 experiences in which they see common ground with a group they thought they were completely opposite from, that builds such a sense of hope. And then all those people become what we call champions of the process. They become believers in a process of having a sort of structured interaction with other. And with a city the size of Córdoba, I don't know, we don't have experience of how long that would take. In Ojai, which is only about, how many thousand people live in Ojai? 30?
Something like that.
Maybe 30,000 people. We only ran 2 workshops and the word just spread everywhere. I mean, there was a buzz about what was going on. So I think in a way, that's another transition design project. Like, how many workshops could you have in how many key places in the city to introduce this as a first step towards something? And then you want to pick champions, like people that are networkers within a group. But so many of these questions won't be answered for a long time now, unfortunately. Well, I'm very aware that we've gone over time, so I'm going to turn it back over to you organizers.
I guess, thank you. We'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, is that okay? I just wondered if you wanted to say something. Yeah, so tomorrow, same time. Tomorrow, you're not gonna be thinking about problems all day. You're gonna develop a vision of the best future you can think about, and then you're gonna think about how to transition from where you are now to that future, and then finally develop an ecology of interventions. I think it will be fun. Okay.
Right.
And thank you all so much for your time.
Thanks.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank
Bye.
you. See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Everyone, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.